soldiers overrun this steamer, I will determine who gets on and off this battleship so that we do not overrun it. That is what I had to say on that fateful day at Pittsburgh Landing in Shiloh, Tennessee, April 6th, 1862. Let me introduce myself. My name is Belle Reynolds. I was born in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts in 1840, of a well-to-do family. My father was a lawyer. In fact, we were so close to the Connecticut River. If you happen to see any runaway slaves, I know how to help them out. But my father decided to move to the West, and he took his young family with him. And later, that is where I found my husband. We were married in Iowa, Cass County, and moved to Peoria, Illinois. Well, I'll never forget that fateful day. We were in the chapel. It was our one-year anniversary. And a messenger came into the chapel and told us there was an attack on Fort Sumter. Now, being from Illinois, we were very well acquainted with our new president, Abraham Lincoln, being from our home state of Illinois. And we knew the tension was burning. So my husband signed up to be part of the 17th Illinois Infantry, and he was their adjutant. Well, shortly thereafter, in August 1861, I decided there's nothing to keep me here in Peoria, so I packed up my trunks. Of course, by now you know, traveling was nothing new to me. This was going to be another journey, so I followed him and caught up with him where the troops were camped at Bird's Point in Missouri. Our troops were doing so good. The Army took Fort Henry and Fort Donaldson, and it gave General Ulysses S. Grant, Brigadier General at that time, a good reputation. So they promoted him to Major General. Things were looking pretty good for the Army at this point, until we moved to Shiloh, Tennessee. I'll never forget that morning. Just as before, I was living this camp life just like a soldier, riding with them, sleeping on the ground, sometimes walking, sometimes in a wagon. And that morning I was preparing breakfast for my husband. Got some pancakes and peaches, which was a treat. I was making him griddle cakes, and there was noise off in the distance. I knew my husband had to go. He got on his horse, but not before I could slap what was in my frying pan into his haversack. And I told him, I'll wait for you. But one soldier came by and he told the ladies, it's not safe here. You should run. So since I was not alone, some of the women, we ran towards the river, towards Pittsburgh Landing, towards the steamer known as the Emerald. And there were cannonballs flying over our head. And soon thereafter, the wagons, or ambulances as we might know them, started coming back to the river. Now what used to be a headquarters ship for Captain Norton, all of a sudden became a hospital ship. I threw off my bonnet and started helping the wounded. And people were running from the battlefield. The Union was being pressed back to the river by the rebels. Our soldiers were even crossing the river, trying to flee from them. And we needed more men. We needed more help. I was very good at writing a journal, and I kept a few notes about that famous day. And let me share a few with these. The shells were bursting in every direction about us. Tents were torn in shreds. And the enemy, in solemn column, was seen coming over the hill in the distance. As they fled, they saw cavalry soldiers forming on the parade ground near the camp. Balls were flying and shells were bursting among the terrified horses and fearless riders. It was not until the wagon master told us to run for our lives that we ran. We stopped and took off our bonnets and prepared to assist in dressing the wounds. but an orderly dashed up, shouting orders to move the wounded immediately to the river. The rebels were closing in, and they were not safe where they were. I dared not ask the boys if my husband was unharmed, and feared each moment to see him among the almost lifeless forms that were being brought on board. At the landing, it was a scene of terror. Rations, forage, and ammunition were trampled into the mud by an excited, infuriated crowd. The trains were huddled together the brow of the hill, and in sheltered places, ambulances were conveying their bleeding loads to different boats and joined to form a babel of confusion indescribable. None were calm and free from distracting anxiety and pain, save the long ranks of dead ranged recognition for burial at the hospital on the hillside. I made my way out to the chapel in the middle of the battlefield. I was walking between corpses of both sides. I made my way to the chapel, where I found a whole bunch of soldiers huddled in the chapel. They were hungry and they were thirsty. I gathered up about 15 men to run to the river to get them something, and they did return back. In the meantime, I was deciding who to save and who to let go. I also wrote this. In the meantime, I was worried about my own dear husband, and then I felt a hand touch me. I hardly knew him, blackened with powder and begrimed with dust, his clothes in disorder and his face pale. We thought it must have been years since we parted. It was no time for words. He told me I must go, and there was a silent pressure of our hands, and I went back onto the boat. Well, about a week later, reinforcement troops did come. All this while, I'm helping our wounded. Governor Yates brought surgeons along with him, which was a great relief to us. I had not had any sleep or anything to eat during this time. And when Governor Yates saw me, he knew I was a wreck. He knew I needed rest and recuperation. So he sent me back to Illinois on the Black Hawk, along with some of our wounded, to come back to Illinois for some rest and recuperation. I couldn't help but talk during this time about the scenes that were so vividly implanted in my head. In fact, Dr. Colburn, who was assisting our wounded, said that I was braver than some of the commissioned officers out there. And he said I should become an officer. And of course, Governor Yates obliged and had his secretary fill out the needed paperwork and commissioned me as a major in the Army. So thus, I was the first woman to become an Army officer in the military. Now, this made a lot of news, and it was in Harper's Weekly, a national newspaper, in May of 1862 of that year. They didn't know how to address me, so they called me Mrs. Major Belle Reynolds. Well, all this media attention got me far, but my husband, well, he was a lieutenant. He had a problem with this. He said that this put him in a position that he would have to take orders from his wife. So he insisted on being promoted to colonel. Of course, my promotion or my records was never listed in the muster rolls of the 17th Illinois Infantry. And he never did get that promotion. But I did learn a lot about life and a lot about death. I did get a jacket, I got a fine horse, I rode and passed the review, and I was known as the daughter of the regiment. I no longer became much of a nurse after that. I would consider myself an invalid. But my husband's regiment is going on to Vicksburg, and I must follow. point is she did go on to be a doctor, and she did live till 1935-ish. I'm not good at years, but I admire her. You have any questions?
Well, now this is what, I can't think of the two girls.
Cass?
Yeah,
Delphine?
Noah's sister
Yeah,
and Noah's girlfriend.
yeah, yeah.
This is the
Delphine.
kind of dress that they would have worn at that time.
Oh, okay, okay.
That's what they would have worn into Cairo to
Yeah.
have taken care of Noah.
Uh-huh. That's what they would have worn. Interesting, don't you think?
And how many petticoats?
I think I got like 2 layers.
Yeah.
And what do you have in your,
And yes, I got the bloomers on.
Oh, and bloomers, yeah, there you go. Yes.
Bloomers over bloomers. And next time you're walking in shorts and you feel like your legs are sticking together, mine do not.
No.
It will be just as hot as everybody else,
Yeah.
but I am pulling it off my skin.
the box of vegetables?
The box of vegetables, this was part of my presentation to be a certified interpretive guide last January, which I haven't gotten the results back yet. But I gave a presentation called Love Letters and Onions. And it's based on a quote, which I have on here. In 1864, Ulysses S. Grant declared an advisory to the federal government, "I will not move my army without onions." You see, we kind of evolved through the Civil War, which was only supposed to last a few weeks. So they started writing love letters, and if you know anything about the Victorians, their love letters were not like LOL.
Yeah.
It was poetic. Then they found out when they did get a letter back, they would hear from the soldiers that would say something like, "Oh, we walked so many miles, my shoes have holes, my socks are worn out." And it became more like comfort boxes where they would send socks and shoes and mittens and things like that along with their letters. It became a little bigger. And then in 1864, Grant is referring to the nutritional needs because all they had was hardtack and a little bit of salt pork and coffee beans to eat. And that's when they learned that they had a scurvy outbreak and stuff like that. And this was not just true of the Union, because General Robert E. Lee also complained to do anything except eat peanuts and chew tobacco while my army is starving. So it was a problem on both sides. And that was just the bulk of that presentation, which is a different subject.
And then in the small box you've got there, the trunk,
trunk?
your trunk?
Well, we know she traveled with trunks from her diaries. I just think that sometimes if she had this outfit on in passing reviews, I just keep the rest of the costume. It does fit me, but it's on safety pinned on a small thing. The gaiters. I have a shawl, and I do have a pistol. She was a pistol packer.
She did. Okay.
So this would have been just the rest of the outfit that I have inside should I decide to do it from that point of view. But I think for the most part, I like to do her more typically. I think she would have been in a camp dress because she was traveling, often sleeping on the ground. Do you have any other questions?
And was that common for women to follow their husbands?
It was. It wasn't until I think early '64 or late '63 where they said no more women allowed.
Okay.
Well, there were a few rebels like Belle and Marie Tepe, and I probably could go look in my book for a few others that didn't pay attention to that and go home. But it was kind of common for wives to follow their husbands in a domestic role.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I didn't know either until like about 8 years ago when I started.
Sure. And she's the first woman that
Had a rank.
Had
There
a
were
rank
others during the Civil War, but since I'm stopping at my story,
Right.
there was
She was the first.
right. She was the first
And in American history, she is the first one
to have
from
any rank.
Illinois, you guys.
And I think that's
pretty
quite
big.
special
It
because
is
our
very
own
special.
backyard.
Yes, exactly. From Peoria, first woman.
Of course, people in Massachusetts like to take credit for her, and so do the people in Iowa.
I bet they do too,
Because
because
she
she lived there.
Because she was
right,
there too.
Right.
Right,
But
but she
she
actually
was
was
from
in
Illinois.
Illinois.
But I like it because, yeah, she was with the Illinois regiment.
Yes, very good. That is
So I
such
think
an
we own her.
interesting story, yes, yes. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank
this
you for
here.
coming.
Yes, thank you very, very much.